Dungeon masters spend a lot of time and energy developing campaign settings. I've been a DM pretty much most of my gaming time. I like that side of the screen. But what this means is that they are investing heavily in these settings. A lot of times this means well-crafted balances of aspects to their world, factions, races, sometimes even character options. What this can do, though, is run the risk of creating conflict between player desires, the characters they want to run, and the DM's vision for their world. So what I'd like to talk about today is really sort of, first of all, why DMs do this. And then also I want to go into some ways that both sides can really look at things to try and come up with a balance. If you're wondering where this comes from, recently there was a Facebook post where this became a really heated discussion. I am in that DM camp, and so I know how much time and effort a DM puts into a world. And I've also felt that sting of creating this lavish world only to have somebody throw what seems like a potential monkey wrench into it when they come up with some character combination that really just doesn't fit your vision. Now, in most cases, I'm able to go ahead and figure that out. But it has caused, clearly for some folks, based on this Facebook discussion, some consternation. I mean, there's clearly a divide out there somewhere. There are obviously DMs who are my way or the highway, and there are obviously some players who feel that if it's in the books, it's in the rules, they should be able to play it. I'm here to tell you that it's not always the case, but there are ways you can go about it to where you can maximize the potential fun for everybody. So, first off, let's look at that concept of fun. Fun is a big word in the game right now, in the hobby right now. It seems to be a very sacred construct that has really manifested in almost this dogmatic presence. There's this expectation that players should be having fun no matter what. DMs should be having fun no matter what. The problem here is that fun is subjective, and fun also tends to ebb and flow. Overall, yes, the goal is to have fun, but with that comes an understanding that during gameplay there may be things that happen that are less fun. If your dice are sucking all night and your character is near death 50% of the time you're playing, it's not going to be fun. It's not a problem with you, and it's not a problem with your game master necessarily, but it certainly isn't going to be as fun. If the paladin in the party is the shining sun of the plot for a good chunk of the adventure, that could be a product of bad GMing. It could be a product of just the way the story went. It could be the product of everybody else's reactions as a total. So fun ebbs and flows. It's not static, and it's certainly not a thing in and of itself. Where the problem comes from is this idea that fun is immutable, that fun is the absolute sacred thing that nobody has any business stepping on. And while, yes, it's a good goal to shoot for, I would say that there is a very precarious edge there, and we should really stay mindful of that when we're doing that. Because pushing your fun can step on somebody else's toes and really absolutely guarantee that they're not going to have fun. Now, this is true of players, and this is true of DMs. So, preamble out of the way, let me go ahead and jump into this. So, why do DMs place limitations on games? And that's really what we're talking about, is how to deal with these limitations on games and how to interact between player and DM in the construct of these limitations. First and foremost, most DMs do this because of story, plot, theme. They limit their worlds because they're trying to create something crafted and specific. Not everything fits cleanly into a world. Not everything fits thematically into a world. If you were going to be running a game where the gods are dead and there are no clerics, then it really is a hard thematic line. But story and plot are very important. Thieves guilds, they may not be a thing in a campaign setting. And so when a player shows up at a table with a character whose background involves a thieves guild, then this is going to be kind of a little weird, because thieves guilds aren't a thing here. Thieves are all independent. They're all crazy wild cards, whatever. Maybe there are no paladins in the game. Maybe there's no such thing as a holy warrior, and the closest you get is a cleric. So, theme, story, and that's classes. Maybe there are no elves. I'm sure everybody's run into that idea of the human-only campaign setting. I've run them myself, or at least mostly human, and there are some things to be said about those settings. I mean, the idea here is that the DM, GM, whatever game you're playing, is really trying to create a world where there is texture, there's flavor. It's not just a big giant pile of everything. It's not a big bowl of everything. A big bowl of everything tastes like nothing. So the idea being they're trying to put in specific flavors to the game so it has something distinct about it. Now, there is something to be said for preference. This is kind of one that I try to stay away from, but I have been guilty of it before in the past. Many players and DMs, and right now we're talking about DMs, because DMs are the ones generally creating the story or creating the world. Though, I suppose it could spill over to the player side when you're talking about collaborative world building, but preference does factor into this. A lot of story and theme often stems from preference. I, for one, have a hard time reconciling gnomes in my game. Not a fan of gnomes. I'm not a fan of Dragonborn, and I'm not a huge fan of tieflings as an actual race, distinct race. I kind of prefer the old Planescape tieflings, where they're very individual and unique things. Now, that said, most of my games in 5th edition have still included these. I find a way, whether that's reskinning or tweaking them a bit to where, maybe some options are available. Like, for example, in my current game, there aren't any rock gnomes, there are no tinker gnomes, but there are forest gnomes. And so the forest gnomes have been very much reskinned to be very naturalistic, almost feral. Not feral as in like animalistic, but just very much wild. So preference plays something, but you can see in that case there, I have actually re-themed them a bit, and so I've tried to work with them. Some other things that can come into play too are going to be style of play. Some DMs, some players, just don't like the certain elements that come with options. Paladins may not appeal to everybody because maybe they just don't like that heavy-duty, smiting hero warrior who just wins every combat and just dominates every battle. Maybe they don't like sorcerers. We're talking about theme, but it's also just, again, style of play. Maybe they don't like the way that sorceress magic works, and so they just opt not to have sorcerers in their world. They prefer the old kind of Vancian magic style, and the clerical magic style, which is really just Vancian magic anyways. They like that, and so that style of play that comes with those things is good. You might have a DM who decides that they really only want certain archetypes and subclasses and stuff to be available because they don't want to deal with the style of play that comes from those. Management of resources can also be a factor. If you are trying to run a game and everybody is coming at you in your game with characters from all sorts of different resources, first of all, you may not have access to those resources, and so you may not be very well versed in the intricacies of that class race combo that the person's trying to bring to the table. If all you've got is the core books, and you come down to the table and you're like, okay, whatever's in core, and somebody's like, hey, but I've got my Xanathars and I want to play Samurai, you're like, I don't have Xanathars, I haven't had a chance to read it over. You might put the kibosh on that. Maybe you don't have Volos, and so there's no Aarakocra. That's fine. So you, again, management of resources. So those are I mean, there are other reasons, but the main reasons that I find when I'm creating worlds myself and when I've talked to other DMs who have created worlds and campaign settings, not necessarily worlds. Sometimes you're not inventing the wheel from, building a world from scratch when you're creating a campaign. You're just creating a new story in an existing world. But sometimes, but what I'm saying is I'd certainly understand these are the main reasons I run across for people coming up with limitations for the game's DMs. So what do you do with all of this? Well, hopefully, before I get into any of the specifics here, hopefully everybody comes to the table. They act like adults, especially if they are adults. If you have kids playing, it can be a bit of a challenge. And if they're not acting adult, at least they're acting reasonably. And you can talk it out. But here are some things that you can do to help facilitate that process. I'm going to start with DMs. I'm going to go to players. So as a DM, number one, have a story reason. If you're going to ban something from your campaign, if you're going to put a hard stop on something from your game, make sure that you have a good, solid story reason for it. If you have a story reason for it, more often than not, your players will be able to at least see the logic on that and get behind that. Even those people who might object to the omission of a particular class, race, spell, whatever the case may be, maybe you don't have healing magic in your game setting. That's a big one, but maybe that's just not a thing. Then, at least if there's a good story reason, that spells it out thematically, and they can really kind of at least invest in that and start, maybe it'll help percolate their imagination and come up with options. Next thing, when you're a DM, regardless of what you have yourself set on for your game, when you're having a discussion with a player about a potential character that they want to play, be respectful of their wishes. Don't tell them they're an idiot. Don't turn your nose up at them. Don't roll your eyes. Don't growl under your mouth, freaking gnomes. Just, don't be derisive. Don't be dismissive of their preference of what it is they want to play. Now, this doesn't but when I say respect their wishes, that doesn't mean you have to acquiesce to their particular request. It just means that understand that their desire to play that character is very much real. It's what they want to do, and they have their reasons for doing it, just like you have your reasons in your game for not wanting to have it there. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a dick. Just, understand, hear them out. 3, and I know I didn't really go 1 and 2 on these, but the third reason here, honestly, be open to input. When you're creating your world, you're often in the zone. You've got this theme, you're painting with all colors of the rainbow, you got the broad strokes, and you got the detail brush out there, and you're really just fine-tuning your setting. You may not have gone in a super detailed route, but maybe you've got your big blocks in place and those are set and you've got them all laid out in front of you. But that player who's coming to you with the new character option that you maybe had already thought you were just going to wave off and you had a good reason for it in the story, maybe that player has actually got a good idea. So an example of this would be in the Aerolith campaign that I ran last year. I really was dead set on just not having Dragonborn in my game. But I had a group of new players, and one of my players wanted to play a Dragonborn Barbarian. Not only did he want to play Dragonborn, but he wanted to play a Dragonborn Barbarian, which just seemed really kind of odd. Until we got to talking about it, and really, almost as soon as he started mentioning this idea, this Dragonborn Barbarian, it started forming in my mind. In my setting, I was going to have the Dragonborn there, but I wasn't going to have them as a player option. And in talking to him about his Dragonborn Barbarian, it just clicked. I ended up with not only did I end up with a Dragonborn Barbarian in my party that I was having to run, but it also helped me figure out what exactly that place for the Dragonborn in my setting was going to be. Because now the Dragonborn were all this barbaric culture, this kind of culture that had fallen from a former greatness. The Dragon Kings were dead. All the great worms were gone from the skies of this campaign world. And that was a thing that I'd already established in the setting, is that there weren't going to be dragons in this world. I know it sounds weird, Dungeons and Dragons without the dragons, but I wanted to make it slightly different. There weren't any dragons, or at least nobody had really seen any dragons, so there was no expectation of dragons. Anybody living in the world would not expect dragons. But now how that factored into the Dragonborn, who I now had to consider because somebody wanted to play one, and I gave him the opportunity. Now we had this fallen civilization. The Dragonborn were all living up, across a pretty wide, impassable expanse of the world. Their culture had fallen into decline. They were living basically in the rubble of their former civilization, and all of that came out of listening to a player who had an option, had an idea for a character that I had already figured out I wasn't going to have in the game, but taking the time to actually listen to his input. Lastly, as a DM, if you are going to ban things from your game, and I hate the word ban, because ban sounds like it's some sort of big, adjudication of just power. No, we're not banning things generally because we're just a bunch of power trippers. But if you're going to omit things from your game, leave them out of your game, write them out of the game. There's a good one. If you're going to write them out of your campaign setting, provide options. Off the top of my head, an example, let's say you have a player comes to you and he wants to play a Wood Elf Druid, and you've already decided there are no Wood Elves. Why you'd do this, I don't know, but hey, maybe you just don't like elves. But you've decided that you still have gnomes in your game. You still have wood gnomes in your game. Say, be willing to, don't just put a hard stop and say, no, man, no elves. Say, okay, you want to play a Wood Elf Druid? I really don't have elves in my world, or at least they're not available as a player race. Would you consider maybe playing like a Forest Gnome Druid? You still kind of get that Sylvan feel. You still have the Druid thing. You're still actually a creature of the woods. It's very similar. You're just maybe 3 feet shorter. It's just, and offer an option there. Maybe if you're not, maybe you could talk to them and say, okay, well, I don't have elves, but there were elves in this world. They're just not around anymore. Have you considered maybe playing just a human who has some strange sort of bloodline affectation where they've got elven features? Maybe they're very fair of skin, fine-featured, and so they have an elfin appearance, and it's often remarked that they look like the elves of mythology. Be willing to discuss options. Be willing to offer options. Hearing from the player is certainly one thing. If the player comes to you and he has input on how to make this character work, even though you've already said it's not something that's going to work, and that's fine. But also, as the DM, be ready to offer up suggestions. If somebody wants to make a half-orc in your campaign, and you're like, I don't have half-orcs. I don't have half-orcs at all. But you know what? We do have barbarians. What if you use the half-orc stats, and we make your character from a particularly rugged, vicious tribe that lives off in this corner of my campaign setting, and you're not a half orc, but you can use his stats, you can use the same game mechanics, and you're a particularly nasty looking barbarian. Does that you're offering him an option. So those are the things that I think a DM really should consider. I'm sure I'm leaving stuff out, and no list is going to cover all of the aspects of any particular situation, because there's those one-offs. There's always those one-offs. So as players, what can you do when you're dealing with a DM who has put restrictions or limitations on their game? That DM who's just written out your favorite race, written out your favorite class, and you're just, you come to them and you want to play this character, and they've already taken this out. So first of all, respect your DM. and your DM's story. Respect, just as when we're talking about DMs respecting players' wishes, respect the idea that your DM is creating a campaign. He's putting a lot of time and effort. He's putting in way more time into this than the entirety of the gaming group put together. If you don't believe this, sit down and try and run the game. And when I'm running a game, I am writing out encounters. I'm at least frameworking adventures. I'm nowadays, in the day of social media, I'm messaging back and forth between players and double checking details, offering suggestions. I'm sometimes even having to manage the group office style, talking to players on the side about things that have been brought up, being a manager. It should almost qualify on a resume, but as a player, just understand that your DM is putting a lot of himself into this setting, and so when he's coming at you with these restrictions and these limitations, there's very likely a good reason, especially in his mind, for their existence. So the next thing would be to, much like the DM should offer options, and much like the DM should respect your input, be willing to offer options. Be willing to collaborate with the DM when he says no. If you want to play a tiefling, and the DM has really said that, tieflings aren't really a thing in this world, but you really want to play that tiefling, come up with some options. I'm not going to tell a player what options to come up with, but, a suggestion off the top of my head. Okay, I want to play a tiefling. I'm not a tiefling, but my character was cursed at birth and has these features, and I'd like to use the tiefling character race. So you're now thematically not a tiefling, but you're statistically, mechanically still a tiefling. And I'll tell you, most often your DM is omitting things not because mechanically they have a problem, though I did mention that there are certainly management of resources and games and gameplay style. Usually these omissions, these preferences for story and plot come from theme and story style. They don't necessarily come from a mechanical point of view. Similar to the idea of running a half-orc as a human barbarian sub-tribe or human barbarian tribe, a tiefling as a cursed child would certainly fit. It's got a story written to it already. Your character is likely going to be accepted. As a player, you're accepting that your character is likely going to be looked on with suspicion and kind of as a freak of some sort. Freak, not insulting anybody, but they're going to be seen as different, and they're likely not going to. They're going to stand out. Just like if you decided to play a half elf in a world without elves, or if you played that, or you were to play some other combination that is non-standard. But when you're be willing to present options. I want to play an elf, but you say there are no elves in the world. Sometimes it could come down to just a really good story. And it sounds cliche, but some DMs are willing to have that one player who is the last of their kind, or that one character who is a stranger in a strange land. You slipped through a portal from another realm. At least discuss it and be willing to try it. Your DM may be willing to entertain that. A lot of these limitations are placed because the style and the theme of the game really buckles if everybody just starts pulling. If you're trying to run a very humanocentric game and you say no elves, you may not be doing so because you don't want elves. Excuse me. You may be doing so because you don't want everybody to come to the table with an elf as a DM. So, certainly being willing to consider options, presenting those options is even better. In this example from earlier, player is up there and he hears, okay, no elves. Instead of the DM offering, hey, I've got forest gnomes, how about a forest gnome druid? And could be the player's like, all right, you don't have elves. Well, forest gnome druid sounds okay. Be willing to play it. and then offer suggestions. That kind of comes in with offering options, offering suggestions. Those go hand in hand. There's not a lot of consideration on the player side as much as the DM side. I mean, really, in these interactions, the weight is on the DM. And so that's going to kind of jump into one last point. And I have to actually thank my friend Moki for this. There are a lot less of us DMs out there than there are players. This was true in the days of yore, and this is even more true nowadays. With the runaway success of role-playing games, and the almost mainstreaming of things like Critical Role and Twitch streams and Saber Dice and Dice Camera Action and all of that stuff, there is a huge demand on DMs. So understand that your table may be the only table that this player has access to, or that they know of. Not everybody has access to a healthy, in-person gaming group in their area. Not everybody is overly comfortable seeking out and walking around with their lantern trying to find a game. Not everybody's ready for or up to the task, equipped for online play. So don't just assume that somebody can find another table. Now, that's not saying that you still can't have limits. But as a DM, understand that there may not be a lot of opportunities for that person to play the character that they are actually coming to you wanting to play. And I apologize, again, the garage gets dry. But when you're talking to a potential player about their character, try your hardest to find a place for that player. If you have room at your table and you're openly soliciting for players and somebody comes to your table and wants to play, do your best to find a place at your table for them. Or if you cannot, as a DM, you absolutely owe it to the hobby to try to make some sort of suggestion. If you are the only table that this player knows about, and they come up to your table and they're like, "Hey, I want to join," it's similar to when they come up to your table like, "Hey, can I play?" And you're like, "I'm sorry, I'm full up." That's a kick to the teeth for a lot of players. It could be their first foray out into trying to find a game. Maybe they just got their player's handbook for birthday, Christmas. They just decided to pick it up off the shelf after after binge watching season 1 of Critical Role. Whatever the case may be, they're hyped to play. Try and find a place to play. If you don't have a spot in your game, but you know about another game, tell them where to find it. If you don't have a spot in your game, but you know about online play, ask them if they've considered online play. If you know of a game store that has an Adventurers League night, point them in that direction. Do something to get that person into a game. It could be as simple as, "Hey, I'm full up," or "You know what, really, this campaign is a human-centric game, and there's really not a place for an elf or a dwarf in it, but Bob over there, he's running a classic D&D campaign. All races are on the table. You really want to dive into that, go ahead and try." Sometimes it could be a matter of going that extra mile and saying, "All right, look, you know what? I don't have room in this game. I have been considering starting up another game." Exchange contact information, whether that's an email or a Twitter account or whatever, a Facebook ID or something like that, and put that person on a list for the next time you run a game. Or it could be even just that glimmer of hope. "You know what, look, I'm not running a game that has elves in it, but I do start up new games time to time. This campaign's running to it. It's coming to an end, and then we're probably going to roll over into another one. Can I reach out to you the next time I run a game?" Do something to try and get those people in a game. As DMs, players I'm going to reach out and speak to you now. Understand and respect the fact that DMs are not, for the most part, not doing this to be power tripping jerks and, you know, lording it above you lowly players that they have these games that you can't get into. That's not most people. Those people exist, and when I find them, I tend to leave well enough alone, but I really just want to wring their neck. You know, it's so bad for the hobby. But there's nobody is served by getting into back and forth, you know, pissing matches over, you know, DMs are jerks, players are, yeah, I've heard the word entitlement minded. I may have even used that in some of my nastier moments where I was really just reading a lot of just vitriol. And, you know, nobody's entitled to do anything for you, you know, for the hobby. But DMs don't block their fun without a reason. I mean, there's enough room and flexibility in the hobby for everybody to find their place at a table. I run 2 games. I run 1 game for adult players. For the most part, you know, it's my gaming group on Mondays. I run another game for my teens and my wife. And those are very different games. The teen game, that table has ebbed and flowed with the number of players based on who is interested. Monday group is pretty tight. We don't actually have a lot of room for new players. You know, my wife coming in and joining the group this last campaign, that put me at 5. And I can run bigger games, but they have to be experienced players at the table for me to run bigger games than that. So there was a lot going on. But we're all here to play the same games with a big old Z sounding S. So DMs, you gotta make your reasons clear. And this one last point, and I probably should have led in with this: don't ambush players with limitations. Set that crap up front. If somebody comes to your table and says, "I want to play in your game," you're like, "Okay, cool. This is the setting. This is what we're doing. This is what's not allowed." Players ask questions. Back in the day, when I used to try and get into other games, I remember this dialogue. "Hey man, you guys playing D&D? Yeah, cool. What edition? First, second? First edition. Cool. What game world?" And what game world was sort of an opening for, like, are you doing Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, a homebrew? And then that often opened the door for a laundry list of mods. But if it didn't come up, and you'd already passed through the, "Hey, do you have an opening? What edition you playing? What world?" and you already made it through, you know, doors, number, rules, or any specifics you're running, and then at that point, the DM would run that down for you. But that is my spiel on limitations in games and DMs and players and how you can deal with it. How do you guys deal with it? Talk about it down below. If you're a DM and you run campaigns and you like to you put story in there and have limitations and stuff, talk about it. Players, I'd love to hear about some people's actual cases or stories of situations where they've run into this, because one of the things that was missing on Facebook was a lot of actual cases. There's a lot of theory arguing, I think, and a lot of principle arguing, but not a lot of individual cases where people have run into this. But in the comments below is a place for that. Like, share, subscribe, email at baittheelf@gmail.com. I'm Elfbait on Twitter, and there's an Elfbait group on Facebook. Join in the fun, let me know what's going on, and as always, get out and game.